All right. Hey there, everybody. Andrew King here, editor-in-chief of Canadian Musician Magazine, and welcome to the latest in NWC Webinars series of totally free music business webinars. Very pleased to be bringing you tonight's session, DIY touring, booking, budgeting, and beyond. Joining me momentarily, Liam Duncan plays in Winnipeg band called the Middle Coast, or I guess I should say Brandon via Winnipeg band, the Middle Coast, as well as a number of other projects. He's a writer for Canadian Musician, CD Babies, a very popular blog, and a number of other outlets. And I guess I should say the webinar this evening is based on a series of 3 features that Liam did for Canadian Musician over the past year, called that DIY Touring. And we looked at, I guess, some of the different components we're going to cover this evening in those. And now's as good a time as any to tell you that you can actually access PDFs of those articles, as well as a breakdown of this evening's slideshow in the resources sidebar that you've got in your interface in front of you there. The PDF of the slideshow has some space for notes beside it, so if you're analog like me and want to take a minute, print that off to be able to jot some things down as we go. Take some time, because I've got a few more housekeeping items to go through. Those of you that have joined us for more than one of these, and thanks, I see there are a few familiar names. It's great having you back. You're very used to this poll, but as always, we just want to gauge who's joining us and from which capacities in the music industry, so that we can, in part, steer tonight's conversation, but more importantly, just to curate topics for upcoming sessions. You can find all the information on those at nwcwebinars.com. That's where you can go and actually access recordings of every session that we've done so far. But it is great having you for the live ones where we can interact with our presenters, like Liam, who I will introduce in a moment. The last thing I'll let you know about before we get started, if you go to musicbooksplus.com/webinars, we've got some discounts on a few books related to touring, DIY touring. Touring Musician's Handbook is there, Touring Musician, a few others. We also have a code. You can get 10% off anything in the Music Books Plus catalog. And of course, there's some tips there too to make the most of this and any future webinar experience. So let's get rolling here. All right. It's not letting me share my screen for some reason. Okay, here, we'll close up the poll here. We've got most people's input, and I can share these results with you. Yeah, majority here are performing and recording artists looking for tips on hitting the road. And thanks to the music industry professionals, maybe a few managers looking for some tips for their clients as well. So we appreciate that. I'll hide those. And here we go. Let's jump into it. All right, so again, I'm Andrew King, editor-in-chief of Canadian Musician. You're here for DIY Touring. We've got Liam Duncan here in the hot seat, Winnipeg-based multi-instrumentalist. And as I mentioned, the Middle Coast is Liam's band, who I absolutely love. Great live band. The debut record is out, available. The breakout single from that is called Paycheck, which we encourage you to check out. He backs up some other folks, and I said CD Baby blog, and I was talking about Sonic Bids before. But yes, a music industry writer, and well, DIY touring expert, as we'll hear in a moment. Without further ado, Liam, it's a thrill having you join us here. Yeah, how are you doing? What's keeping you busy music-wise these days?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm just about to go on tour actually with the Middle Coast. We do this kind of cool thing where we go on tour and open up for this artist, Michael Bernard Fitzgerald, who's a great pop act out of Calgary, and then we also are his backing band. So it means I get to play a lot of music in a night, which is great.
Spot on. As we get going here, if anyone's got any questions, feel free to fire those at us as we go. You can send them in via text in your interface there. We'll have a question period about partway through the presentation, and we'll take as many as we can there, especially ones that relate to something that Liam and I have discussed already. If we don't get to your question then, don't worry about it, because at the end we'll open up for a longer and wider reaching question period. We'll throw everything we can at Liam, and yeah, always encourage your feedback. So in the presentation this evening, here's a quick breakdown of what to expect. So first we're going to basically throw out some tips on how to decide if it even makes sense for you and or your project to hit the road at this point in your career. After that, once we've established it, we'll talk about booking career building shows, and we'll, I guess most importantly, what we mean, or what Liam means by that term, career building shows, give you some tips on how to identify those opportunities, how to generate them, how to capitalize on them, and then we'll talk about some ideas for, you've got your tour, you know where you're headed, how can you let people know about it? And at that point, we'll open up to a few questions, and then when we come back, we'll tackle what I think to be, or at least the one we get the most questions about, but about money, budgeting for the road, how to make sure that you're coming home well, without being in massive debt and with a broken down van, which Liam has some stories about, I'm sure. And then that last point too, just some tips for ordering, selling merch, which is a very important part of your income and overall balance sheet when you are touring. Then we'll have our final question period. So does touring make sense for you? Liam, jump into it here, and where we're starting is a point that you'd made in part one of the DIY touring series, but basically just about, you know, does it even make sense for your act to tour? And there are some where, I mean, EDM DJs come to mind or something, but you know, where you can be very successful disseminating music without necessarily hitting the road. Yeah, you tell us how you differentiate a touring versus a primarily non-touring artist.
Sure. I mean, when I was starting touring, I was always looking to other artists to see what venues they were playing and the kind of shows that they were getting and whatnot. And something that you'll notice if you start to do that is that some bands hit the road and they're touring all the time, and then other bands don't. And they seem to be doing potentially a similar level of success. They might not be making the same amount of money, but you know, they're, as you said, their music is getting out there and it's fairly effective, and they're doing pretty well, but some bands just seem to tour and others don't. And I think there's a few reasons for why that is. So the two bands that I talked about in the article were Winnipeg bands, Attica Riots and the Bros Landreth, both of which are definitely worth checking out. The Bros toured at one point 250 days a year, and it was an incredibly effective strategy for them. It made them an incredibly tight band. People loved to see them live. And they just, like, that was where they made their fans. Their album was also great. It's a great album. But they really made their fans super effectively live. It was a very convincing live show. Attica Riots, also one of the best live shows I've ever seen in my entire life.
Yeah.
They're so good. It's crazy. But they're a six-person band. And it's way harder to tour a six-person band than even a four-person band. Or in my case, my band's a three-person band. And basically, they were all about between 28 and 30, and it just, that makes a difference too. You know, my band started touring when we were 17 or 18. I didn't care if I was sleeping on a floor or a sofa or a bed. Beds are nice, but sofas are fine. And so maybe it just depends what kind of stuff you're going to want to put yourself through, because when you start, and I've talked to the Bros about this as well, because when they started, they were doing basically the same tour that we were doing, like playing to 15 people in Moose Jaw or wherever. And some bands just aren't really down to do that. Like Attica Riots, they had been in a successful band before, a couple successful bands between the four of them. And so they just kind of wanted to skip over that. And they also already had an entire team built because they got a manager right away. So, yeah, some bands are able to tour and others aren't. Also, your genre matters as well. Like folk artists, I'm sorry, there's no other way. You're going to have to tour. You're going to have to tour a lot. But as you said, you know, pop acts, EDM acts, they don't tour as much. They do more of a summer festival circuit. They play a lot in their hometown, really max out that hometown crowd. And then they'll do a lot of showcasing too.
Yeah, I think we can kind of tie all these things together. Great examples in Attica Riots and the Brothers Landreth. I mean, Brothers Landreth do come from, I guess, in part that folk scene, and thus it kind of makes sense for them to do the Road Warrior, just grind it out and build up your market slowly but surely. And now you see their name everywhere. So, I mean, it certainly worked for them. And on the flip side, Attica Riots, I just had the chance to see them at Breakout West in September. I mean, they are now, having waited so long until their record came out to really tour outside of their home market, they're now being booked by Jack Ross, one of the most important, influential booking agents in the country right now. So I mean, yeah, two very different approaches to different genres, of course, and both approaches seem to be very, very, very successful. So I guess there are a number of considerations to make here. So let's say then that we've established, you do come from a genre where it makes sense to tour. There's potential for like other bands that you look up to or sound like have had success on the road. So you think that makes sense for you. As far as timeline, if all the other boxes are checked, what are some of the things you need to consider as to whether it makes sense to jump on the road now and maybe take your licks, or things you can do, wait 6 months and try to get some more of your ducks in a row? Any advice on that front?
Sure. I mean, one thing I will say is that I think it's important for pretty much every artist to do some sort of self-booked tour, because I think any agent will tell you that they appreciate it when an artist has done some of that, because they don't have to explain how a door deal works or what an average room fee is or whatever. You've done it yourself, you've made those mistakes, and then it's easier to work with an agent once you get going. So I think that at some point it makes sense for nearly every artist to tour. It's kind of up to you. But then I think when it comes to deciding when the actual right time is to do it, I think it basically comes down to knowing what you want to achieve by touring. For us, initially, honestly, we just wanted to play every night because we were in kind of a small town, Brandon, and we were just kind of running out of opportunities locally. So we were just like, well, I see other bands going on tour. Why don't we do that? And we wanted to play every night. We wanted to see how that worked, wanted to see a bit of the country. And so that's why we started to do it. But also, we also wanted to like be career musicians, right? At the ages of 18, which I don't know, call it crazy, but that's just what we wanted to do. So we were just trying to figure out some sort of way to make money and like keep ourselves busy, basically, in a place where there isn't a whole lot of industry. You can't do much showcasing in Brandon. Like, there's just not a whole lot to do. So you hit the road, and we hit the road and started building a grassroots fan base.
Right.
So it's just a matter of knowing what you want to achieve.
So to this last point before we move on then, like just having an idea of what you're biting off if indeed you decide to do this. I've just got a few items listed here as far as like time, both being out on the road and preparation. Commitment, as you said, you might very well find yourself sleeping on floors or stuck somewhere for 48 hours waiting for a van to get fixed. So on that line, I guess you can really only speak to your own experiences or those from some of your peers, knowing that you're pretty well connected in Winnipeg. But any advice on things that people should definitely have as far as resources, or just have an idea of before they decide, take the plunge and start trying to book shows in different cities?
Yeah, so I did actually write down a few things here. The first thing that you'll need is the time, and that is both like time that you've already invested and just like time in general. You need to invest time first and foremost in putting together a really killer live set. I think I mentioned in the article that when we started, our live set was not super killer, and we kind of used touring to really tighten up and like develop a good live set.
Mm-hmm.
And that's fine, I guess. Wouldn't do it again, really. I guess if you're 17, that's fine. But now I'm just like, imagine if we'd actually put in the time and made something cohesive that actually worked. So you need to think seriously about that and take it seriously. And like, there's no reason that your set should honestly be any worse than anything you see in the MTS Center, minus the cool light show. But you can have transitions. You can have like a really killer set that really works for a lot of people at pretty much any stage in the game. So that's something that you need to invest time in. And then the other thing is you'll need the time to actually book the shows. And I would say for like a 2-week tour, it's probably 40 plus hours of work between like figuring out, well, more on your first time, between figuring out the routing that you want, and then figuring out where to play, and then figuring out who to play with, and then actually tracking down the promoters, which can be extremely frustrating. And then finally just actually doing it, you need to be able to take 2.5 weeks off work or whatever you're doing, school. So you need to have the time. And then you also need to have some sort of touring vehicle. It seems kind of obvious, but it's pretty helpful to have that. Renting a vehicle is an option, but it's not super ideal because it's pretty hard to rent a van for any length of time for under 3 grand.
Yeah.
So if you can figure out some way to like pull a trailer or however you got to make it work. And then you also have to have like some startup money to get going because it does cost money to just get out on the road. And you like I remember the first show that we ever played, we made $15 and bought a hotel room. So negative $100 on that show. And there was 2 people there and it was so depressing. But then our next show is actually a lot better for whatever reason. Like who can tell? Um, so and then you kind of just need to have an attitude of once you're out there on the road, you can't get too sad about it because you're doing it. So just enjoy it, and yeah, having a good attitude about it makes a huge difference. Trust me.
Yeah, right on. So the fact that we're talking about do-it-yourself touring, we're approaching this from the sense of, this is either your first tour or one of your first tours where you're still, I guess, kind of working at the craft that this actually is. So because of that, assuming that this is one of those first jaunts, that's why booking career-building shows is something that we really want to focus on and discuss. If you're going out cross-country for your 4th time in as many years, you may be past the stage where your career is very much built, and now you're building your brand and yeah, looking to promote music, make income otherwise. But I guess start us off here. How do you define career building shows? What makes a career building show? What are some examples of some that might seem like they're good career building opportunities but are deceptive in that way?
Sure, I'll just start with the first point. The 2 things that I think make a career building show are shows that will build you a fan base and shows that will build you industry attention. And related to that, I think it's important to build fan bases in places that actually matter. So Brandon, honestly, not being one of them. You could probably skip over Brandon, Manitoba, and that would be fine. Play in Winnipeg and go straight to Regina. I mean, if you can get a show in Brandon, that's fine. I'll tell my friends to come out. But yeah, so markets that matter, and then building fans and building industry attention. And then with that, you'll end up booking initially a lot of shows where you're just kind of headlining. That's kind of the intuition that a lot of people have, is to go out and headline a bunch of shows at a bunch of different bars. And that sounds pretty cool, and it'll be fun anyways, but it's typically pretty ineffective. Like, you're pretty lucky if some people are actually at the bar, and then you're really lucky if any of them actually care. So if you happen to be playing at a bar where there is some sort of built-in audience, a lot of the time the people aren't really there for you. They're there for the hockey game, or they're there for wing night, or whatever. And then they're kind of potentially annoyed that there's even a band there. So what you want to focus on instead are shows where you are opening, you're the support act in some other city, and then that exposes you to people who actually came out to see live music. Ideally, it's a good bill, and the music is kind of similar or whatever, or the people that like their music are going to like yours. And then hopefully, instead of making fans 5 at a time, you're making fans maybe 20 at a time or something
Right.
a little bit better than that. What was that second part that you talked about? Oh,
Well,
yeah.
but actually, you nailed it. I was thinking that there is that common misconception that if our name is the top of the bill, that's great for us, and people will see that we're already on a headlining tour. Whereas in your articles, you made a point that there are many ways you stand to benefit by, I guess, yeah, being the support act, especially if it's a new market, or you can be on the bill with a band that's got a much higher hard ticket draw, or some combination of the two. But maybe there's other examples.
Yeah, well, I think the other example that is relevant are like showcase opportunities, like good ones at like well-known showcases like Canadian Music Week, Breakout West, whatnot. Those are things that aren't going to pay you a lot of money, and there might not even be that many people there, but at least there's lots of industry there, so there's some potential to get some people out. At the same time, I sort of have my doubts about how effective those can be for actually independent bands. Like without someone working those showcases for you, it's pretty hard to actually get people out. But we've had a little bit of success getting people out and building like a little bit of buzz. But I don't know. That one you might have to feel out for yourself because I've also seen other bands that are completely independent that are they just have more of a buzz than we did, and then they actually get good showcase opportunities and it works out really well for them.
Yeah.
You were also talking about like shows that seem like career building shows but aren't.
Hmm.
And my favorite example of that, and it's one that we did all the time, is house concerts actually. Um,
Okay.
People really think that house concerts are good for career building shows because they're very intimate. And to be honest, even for folk acts, they're not really the best because you're playing them in sometimes weird little cities or weird little towns or whatever that you may not want to come back to. And then a lot of the time, people are only coming out to a house concert because it's a house concert. You're gonna have a hard time getting them out to a bar, and that's certainly what we found. Like there's been some places that we've played several. Red Deer is the example. We played several house concerts at like a really good house concert venue. They treat you extremely well. You come out with like $800. It's great, but convincing those people to come to the bar in Red Deer is quite difficult. So that's sort of what we learned, and then we kind of abandoned house concerts for anything but just making money and like playing a fun show and selling merch and stuff.
Mhm. And I guess that's a great example of career building, not always meaning money making. Because yeah, I was on the board of directors for Music PEI for a while. We have a very, very strong folk scene there with a lot of established slash exporting artists, and thus the house concert circuit was very good in that you could go out, make some money, sell some, and it is what it was. It worked really well for them. But these
Yeah,
were artists that already had quite a fair bit of stamina behind their name in those circuits. And I see exactly what you're saying. If you're trying to build up fan bases in new markets, how they may be deceptive and yeah, career building not always meaning money making, and vice versa. Um, so yeah, I guess one that I want to throw out here is, and there's probably a myriad of answers here, but you've given us an idea of what a career building show is. How do you go about finding those types of opportunities, especially in markets that are however many 100 kilometers away from your home base?
yeah. It's not super easy, and you should just acknowledge right away that you may not be able to find an actually good show in a city, and that's fine. Just play whatever show you can get at that point. But generally, how we go about it is, uh, I'm just thinking here. Yeah, so how we usually go about it is like we're looking up shows at bars that we want to ideally be playing at, and then we typically go about asking both the venue and the band itself if we can be on the bill. Because sometimes the bands are in charge of like putting together a bill, and sometimes the venue is. And then if they're being booked through a promoter, then the promoter would be the person to contact there. So often you end up having to like throw out 3 or 4 various emails or Facebook messages or what have you. And it's just like providing your normal sort of booking kit with a live video and saying like, hey, we're coming through from this city. We would love to be on this bill. Looks really great. Thanks for your time. And then you see what happens. And we've actually had some like really awesome random things happen from that. Got this really good opening slot for a sold out 250 person room in Toronto, of all places, with this band that we never had heard of, but they were kind of big or whatever. And we just sent them our music, and they're like, yeah, we like it. We'll put you on the show. And that was like the best show that we probably ever got as an independent band. Now we're not independent, so we get those kind of shows easier. But yeah, but that's basically how you do it. It just takes a lot of work and some time. And then the other thing that you can do is if you end up playing a show that isn't necessarily career building, say you end up, we used to play winos in Calgary all the time. So we would invite promoters from other venues or just promoters, and we'd invite other bands out, and we'd make an effort to like hang out with those bands and make connections there. And that way, it's a lot easier to approach a band and say that you already know and you've hung out with and say, hey, like we'd love to play a show with you. We'd host you in Winnipeg. Can we set up a show on this day at this venue? And then they're also way more connected in their own city, so they can just send a message to the venue booker who's they probably know personally and be like, hey, can we have play a show at this time with this band from Winnipeg, and they'll just make it happen. We've done that in lots of markets now, like Regina, Saskatoon, Calgary, Edmonton, and anywhere in Western Canada. We have lots of musician friends that we can tap and say, hey, can we play a show in your city? And they'll often try to make it happen, or at least set us up with some other local band that they think would be good.
We've got some questions coming in, which is great, and please keep them coming. We'll be getting to that very, very shortly. But yeah, as far as capitalizing on career building shows, I've got to throw out an anecdote here, because the first time I ever met Liam, I was out in Winnipeg for an industry event, and I think it was you. I was going to say maybe it was Dylan, but I think it was you. Sent me an email and, hey, Andrew, this is who I am, this is our band, here's some music, we're playing a show at this venue at this time. And like the venue was a little off the beaten path even from some of the other showcases happening. In fact, I don't even think it was a showcase, it was that event
It wasn't. No,
at the
it was just a
Forest.
weird show. Yeah.
Yeah, a weird show at a cool, I was going to say venue, not even really a venue, but in a cool spot in the city. And anyway, it's like we always, and by we I mean industry quote unquote delegates, are always telling people to take this kind of proactive approach. So when I got Liam's email, really started digging the tunes, I jumped in a taxi with a friend and went to see the show. Had a great time, and he and I have been back and forth working on things ever since. So I say that just to say, as far as capitalizing on career building shows, check, invite local industry, or I guess visiting industry if you're the local band, and yeah, walk us through some of these other ideas, like making connections with hard to reach people, some anecdotes of ways that you've put any of these ideas on capitalizing on these shows into practice would be awesome.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, one thing I'll say is that not everyone actually answers indie bands' emails, so thanks for doing that, Andrew.
Awesome.
Yeah, like we always used to, probably still should. We haven't been as much lately, but we always used to invite all the local industry, anyone we could find, promoters, people who like have local record labels, college radio stations, whatever. It all helps. Like, and those are like the cool people to know in each city, anyways. Like, who doesn't want to hang out with more artsy people in every city that you go to? And then we would often use shows at worse bars that we ideally didn't want to play next time to invite the promoter from the bar that we did want to play out to the show. And even if they only catch one or two songs, it's usually enough for them to be like, oh, okay, this band is actually not the worst. I will maybe book them for a show later. And so those are the hard to reach people that I'm talking about, is like the bigger venues or just the nicer venues that never answer your emails. There's a venue in Saskatoon that wouldn't answer our emails forever. And then we invited the guy out to a show. He actually came out, which was really nice of him. And then he liked it and he said, oh, I'll get you in our venue next time. I was like, okay, great. Thanks a lot. Wish you'd just listen to the music in the email, but whatever. I mean, it worked. So that's kind of my anecdote there. And then the other thing that you can do with your career building shows that we did a pretty good job of for a while was really making sure that you get out and talk to the people who actually came to the show and liked the show. When every time anyone signed up for our mailing list, we would actually email them the next day in the van, say thank you. If we could remember them, we'd include like a little anecdote about the conversation we had. It really makes people feel kind of important, and it kind of impresses them. And then they're more likely to come out to your shows after. It's just really treating everyone that comes out to your show with a lot of respect and being really grateful that they came. And yeah, and that I have seen bands that they don't do that, and it kind of works for them because they got sort of an image. But we were always a band that were very personable on stage, and we were that way on stage, off stage as well. Sorry, and it's always benefited us quite a lot. So.
Oh, spot on. Yeah, we've got here, use your social media platforms to capitalize on career building shows, but maybe that's, well, I was going to say redundant, but more of a lead into promoting your tour. So we've got underneath here like independent promotion, which is what we're really going to focus on and break down some of these points. But of course, the opposite, or not opposite, but the other option to independent promotion is hiring a publicist. So we can talk about when and why that might make sense. But to start us off here, yeah, you're promoting your tour. So you book your dates. Say it's a 2 or 3 week trip within a 500-kilometer radius of your hometown. Great first point here. Maybe it's good to tackle kind of all as one sentence. Your advice is don't rely on the venue or promoter to promote the show. That's your job, but you can make it easy for them to support you in those efforts. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, apparently there was the time at one point in the past where the venues did most of the promotion and people just showed up, I guess. I hear that's the way it was. I was never around for that. But yeah, most venues don't really promote shows very well. There's a venue in Winnipeg that does a really great job of promoting their touring acts. It's called the Goodwill. And if you're wanting to start up a venue, you should look to them because they do a great job. But basically, venues just can't afford to like put a big advertising budget, and a lot of the time they, for whatever reason, won't even put up your poster or whatever. But you should make it really easy for them to help you out, and that typically means making a Facebook event and adding them as an admin, sending them some blank posters for them to write in the show details, or if they ask you for a poster, make sure you send them the posters, because we have had venues that'll put up posters all around the city, which is very cool, but not everyone does that. And then just like being smart about going after any local publicity that you can. It really doesn't take that much time. It's just like a couple quick emails to whatever you find under Calgary arts magazines and blogs. Sending a couple quick emails to them about the show, and trying to drum up a little bit of your own publicity there. And then being good on social media is definitely important. Although lately my thinking has been developing a little bit differently on the social media front, because I wrote that article I think a year and a half ago, or a year ago, I can't remember. And I think things have changed a little bit in the social media realm these days, where posting every day on tour used to be a good habit, and now I'm not so sure that it is. I think that a lot of bands don't do that for a good reason now. I think it kind of wears people out, and there's just so much stuff on social media already that you kind of want to save your posts for bigger things. That said, you should take advantage of like Facebook ads and Instagram ads, because you can target those at wherever you're playing without having to post them on your account for everyone to see. So that is my recommendation now. That's what we do.
Right on. And then you mentioned, I guess it's a lot of the same principles here about relying on local support acts, or I guess this might work, or by extension be, if it is a career building show and you're playing underneath a local headliner, yeah, even if they are well known in that market, you don't really know how much effort they're going to put into promoting the event. So yeah, tell me a bit about how your relationship with, or communication with, I should say, whoever you're sharing the bill with, whether it's support or a headliner, it can help you through some teamwork to make the most of the show.
Sure. I think there's definitely two parts to that. If you are the headliner and you've got local support, there's no guarantee that they're actually going to bring anyone out. And if you asked to borrow their bass amp, there's definitely no guarantee that they're actually going to remember to bring it. So make sure that you do everything the way you normally would if it was just you booking it. Like, do all the posters, all the Facebook, all the publicity. It's not, if they can bring out 10 other people, then they have done their job, and you're still the headliner who is supposed to bring out the most people. If you're the support act in another town, the headliner is going to hate you if you don't do any promotion for yourself, because they are counting on you to at least do something, bring out a few people, make some Facebook posts, try and go after some publicity, whatever you can afford to do. You kind of still have to put the same amount of effort in. That said, there's some shows that I've played where I've been the support and we don't put any effort in because it's like already sold out, so there's no point. You can just put it on your Facebook, and that's really all that you have to do. But most of the time, that's not the case. If you're on a bill with like a bunch of other indie bands from that city, you have to promote just as hard and really be super thankful that you were able to get on that bill.
Bingo. Friends and family. How does leveraging support from friends and family, I was going to say work, but I see that as kind of a double-edged coin, or double-edged sword, two sides of the coin, where Um, could it ever maybe hurt your brand if someone noticed that your biggest champions had the same last name as you and were 50-year-old women, aka probably mom or aunts? Like, is there a wise way to tap your friends and family to help you promote something and to make sure that you've got some control over imagery there?
That's a good point. I don't really know. I've personally just never really cared about that. I think it matters more that there's just people there. But
Hmm.
you're right that potentially they could be embarrassing, I guess, or just like kind of look weird amongst. We've played shows like that, I guess, where it's mostly 20-year-olds, but then there's some gray hairs in the back. But at the same time, those are often the people who are actually buying your merch and are going to order your album with a pre-order. Like the older folks are the ones that actually have the money to support your career. So I don't know. I wouldn't really leave anyone behind. And when we were just starting out, we'd always tell all of our friends and family way in advance and like send them a live video for them to share with their friends because those are going to be the first people who are the most likely to come and hear a band that maybe they've never heard. And
Hmm.
so I always liked to, make it kind of special for them and treat them well. And it's, yeah, I think that's the nice thing to do. One of my favorite things about touring is getting to see my friends and family across the country that I don't get to see as much. I get to see my family all over the country way more than everyone else in my family does, and that's definitely nice.
All great points, and I'm glad we went there. Just for clarification, so I don't sound like a hater and or ignorant, but I was talking more like in the promotion of the show, say on Facebook. If it's your family that's always pimping out the
Oh
same
yeah,
post day after day, like go see this very hip band. That's where I was thinking, there may be
fair.
a bit of control to put on as far as bringing those folks out to your show. Um, yeah, I'm totally with you and did not mean to imply that you shouldn't invite certain members of your family for coolness factors. So just
Totally.
clarifying. Um,
That's funny. I was just gonna say that typically the first person that comments on anything we post on social media is our drummer's grandparents, and
there you go.
there's just nothing you can do. They're going to comment anyways, so love it.
Hey, shout out to Mr. and Mrs. Oh, I was going to say Clark, but maybe I'm on the wrong side of the family. Anyway,
It's the Clarks. Yeah.
yeah, nice. Okay. Yeah, we talked about or mentioned about the effectiveness of Facebook and Instagram ads, which you can target to very specific locations and demographics, which is a huge help for this. And again, kind of keeps that um, content off of your page slash feed and only goes to the people that you want it to. So I guess that wraps us up nicely here. If anyone has some further questions on ways to promote your tour or anything we touched on here, throw them at us because we're going to jump to questions right after we talk about hiring a publicist. I mean, yeah, if this is your first tour or say first of two or three, still kind of finding your footing in new markets. Does it make sense to hire a publicist? Have you guys had good or bad experiences with that one way or the other?
I would say they're mostly my personal experiences have mostly been mediocre, bordering on sort of pointless. Like I think that for indie bands, a lot of the stuff that you are gonna get with a publicist, you could probably get yourself. Um, typically, I think that's usually that's been my. I don't want to like hate on publicists at all because they do great work but I
Mhm.
just think a lot of the time you're gonna have trouble. Your publicist is gonna have trouble for the same reason that you do, just because no one knows who your band is. So it's hard to get journalists or bloggers or whatever to take a chance on writing something about your band if they don't know who you are already. So I guess I should just say that I think you should do some of your own publicity, and it's not a lot of the things aren't super hard. You just kind of have to don't shoot too far over your weight class, so to speak. Like
Mhm.
go after when you're just starting off, go after like the local music blogs because there are always a few of those. Go after the college radio stations. Go after the college magazines. Um, yeah, all those things are definitely worth getting. We've definitely had they just look good from an industry standpoint. They always do really well on social media. Uh, Something else to do on tour, and it's like a little extra promotion. Definitely go after those yourself. when you feel like you're getting to a point where a publicist is necessary, go for it. And I
Mhm.
think that is also genre specific. Some genres will have way more luck with a publicist than others. So
That's a great point, and I guess we should tack on too. Like, yeah, a good publicist will do a great job when they've got something that's starting to gain traction somewhere, and can then sort of help to extend that. A publicist that's worth their salt, though, if you're just starting out your career and go asking them about, helping you with the national campaign because you're,
mhm.
well, to keep talking about red deer, moose jaw, but playing those for the first time, they'll probably hopefully tell you that it's not worth your while and that they need
Hopefully.
a certain level. Yeah, before taking your money. Shouts out to all the great publicists that we work with. Questions. I'm realizing yeah, as far as time, we are fine to bleed over the hour a bit here, but maybe I'll also pull up my socks a bit. But yeah, some great questions. To start us off here, so say, Liam, you're doing a 2 or 3 week run from Winnipeg to Alberta and back, so covering the prairies. Generally speaking, and I'm sure there's some variables here, but how long before you want to go back to any given market? And is there a difference there as to whether you are still a band building their profile, booking career building shows versus, a headlining act that doesn't want to oversaturate a market that they, may have kind of tapped out?
Yeah, no, there definitely is a huge difference. For us at our stage, we could play Regina every single month, and that would definitely be a good thing for us. Like, there's basically no downside to that. Besides, you're maybe wearing out the 20 people that already know you in Regina. But you can pretty much play those places as much as you want until you get to a point where I would say if you have like a 100-person draw in a market, like that's about, we can pull between 100 and 120 or 130 people in Calgary. So in Calgary, I wouldn't do that. I would play once every 6 to 8 months, probably more on the 8 month side. Twice a year is pretty good for an indie band, I would say.
There you go. Another one here. If you are, say, a solo artist or maybe a duo, um, and you're pretty, what am I trying to say, internal, I suppose, and like self-sustaining, but you do need extra help in terms of musicians on tour. Yeah, you being a session player, hired gun, any advice for people on how to go about putting together a band solely for a tour? Yeah, and then just knowing that they're not going to be a part of future projects.
Totally. That is hard. So whoever the solo product is out there, uh, yeah, it's not always easy because for a lot of reasons, like when my band goes on tour, we all split whatever money we make or don't make, and no one is expecting a certain amount of money really. Whereas when you're hiring side people, side musicians, then they are expecting to get paid a certain amount, whatever that is, at the end of the tour. So I've seen this done a few ways. I think it's important to be realistic about whether or not you actually need a full band on tour. Some bands totally do, other bands don't. There's a artist in Winnipeg called Sean Burns, and he's toured for years as just a duo, just him and a guitar player. And with that scenario, he actually worked out a thing where basically they would split the profit evenly. So on a really good show, uh, the side man would make more than he normally would, and then on the bad shows, unfortunately, he would just have to take $50 or whatever. So I think the things to keep in mind, speaking as someone who often gets hired to play keyboard for people, are just being really honest about how much money you're actually expecting to make, how much money you can actually afford to pay them, and then what their expectations are on the road. So just treating your hired musicians well, trying to make things comfortable for them, but also just being realistic. Like, hey, this show I lost $200 on. Are you okay if I don't pay you for it? Maybe that's something that you could, depending on your relationship, maybe that's something that you could talk to them about. And then if you have a good show later on in the tour, maybe consider giving them all the money from it. Just making it work for them. But I think the key thing is just being honest about with your hired musicians about what the tour is going to be like.
Bang on. Yeah, actually, last month's session with Byron Pascoe, we were talking about band agreements, but one of the recurring points there was like talk it out, use your words, get everyone
Yeah.
on the same page, and you're going to be in great shape. So, as Liam's saying, just be transparent, paint an honest picture of what you're asking, what the person can expect, and yeah, let them make a decision. So here's a big one. Budgeting, budgeting, budgeting. And we'll direct you to, I think it's part 2 of Liam's features, which again, you can grab for free, handy PDF, or ebook, I should say, in the resources there that'll flesh this out a lot more. But if you have questions as we go, ask, but do consult that. So budgeting for the road. I guess steps 1 and 2, it's like budgeting for anything else, trying to balance it out, but where's your money coming from? Where's your money going? And how do we get those to be as close together as possible? Or if you're going to be so lucky to make income greater than expenses, give us an idea. I mean, we've got all the different categories listed here, so maybe we don't need to go through each one by one, but rather, can you, give us an idea about what to expect in your first time on the road as far as income and how to kind of wisely play the balancing game?
Sure. I mean, for one thing, our band has never ever lost money on the road. We broke even one time, but we've never actually lost money, which is great. And I think a lot of people assume that they are going to lose money, and people do. But I think you'd be surprised, honestly, by how much you can potentially make if you throw a few house concerts in there and a few little money-making gigs here and there, and that can actually carry you pretty far if you're smart about how you're doing your expenses. So when I'm making a budget for a tour, I'm also usually applying for a grant. And since I'm assuming it's mostly Canadians here, there are lots of grants out there, provincial and federal, and those will really help you make a budget. They pretty much have everything that you would possibly spend money on laid out in their grant application. So my grant application phase and my budgeting phase are usually the same.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's actually like, if you're not applying for grants, that's a in and of itself, it's a really good reason to do it because it just organizes your whole tour. When I write the grant and I'm trying to figure out how many hotels we're going to have to buy, it's like I go through the cities and I figure out if I'm going to be able to stay with friends or if I'm going to have to buy a hotel. And then often if you're booking that far out, you can get a really good deal on the hotel. So I book the hotel right there. And then by the time I've done the grant, I usually have all the hotels booked, any sort of travel booked, and I know almost exactly how much I'm going to spend on the rest of the tour. So that's kind of my chief advice. I'm not sure if you can help me along and ask me another question to do with that or something.
That's exactly what I'm going to do. And on the side note, we've got some more questions coming in. Graham, I see you. Nice having you, and we'll get to that in a second. Yeah, I guess a big one is like with, even if it's your first tour, if you're talking gas, if you're talking about hotels, like these are expenses that people would have a really good idea of, even just ballpark anyways. I guess with guarantees, that's something that's established ahead of time. Tickets and door, you can do your best estimating there. But as far as some of these other expenses, like gas, mileage, and by mileage, I mean like not just when you fill up, but having some money there for other vehicle maintenance potential issues. Maybe the question is, what are some of the more surprising to you guys expenses that you've incurred, either in that A, it was an expense that you had to consider at all, or B, maybe the amount that you had to allot for it surprised you? Like, are there any on here that you can let people know about who, on their first tour might just unfortunately be ignorant to that?
Totally. Yeah, so the one thing that builds up the most for sure is food, especially if you've got more than 3 people. Like we're lucky to only have 3 people, but it really does cost a lot to eat these days, and especially if you're occasionally buy a beer or whatever, it adds up pretty quick. The other thing that surprised us was the first time that we took a ferry to Victoria from Vancouver. That was super expensive. um, the couple times that our van, well, actually just one time that our van broke down and actually needed a repair. Um, that cost $1,100, so that kind of sucked. But typically, I find that I spend less on gas than I usually think I will, and because I usually calculate it based on uh, like how far away the cities are and the gas mileage that the van gets. And then I usually account for about 50 kilometers of in-city driving, but we typically do less than that. And for whatever reason, we usually come up with less gas than I thought. Um, Promotion, now we spend way more on that, like on Facebook ads and stuff. It's still not really that much. It's usually about 10 or 15 bucks a city, but that ends up adding up a little bit. And then the other thing that adds up is like parking and taxis and stuff.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, because some in the big cities, like you're gonna have to pay to park, and that can sometimes be as much as 15 or 20 bucks, especially if you have to park overnight and you want to put it in like an underground parking garage or somewhere safer. Like I've paid like 40 bucks to park the van in an underground parking garage in an area that I was suspect of. So.
Um, One more question on that note, where like you mentioned that you'll budget or plan for like 50 kilometers of in-city driving. Chances are you're not going to hit that. Is it wise in a number of these? Like, how far do you overshoot the runway on some of these expenses? Like, just to make sure that you're trying to split that hair between being realistic, but also making sure that, you know, anywhere it's a close call that you're rounding up so that if there's a surprise, you come out on top.
Yeah, good point. I always plan for two extra hotels, even if I don't think I'll need them, because we've had experiences before where a show cancels the day before, then all of a sudden you're stuck somewhere weird and you have to get a hotel. Um, excuse me. And I always plan for more food than we'll actually need. Like food is already expensive, but it just kind of depends on the circumstances. Like when we started out, more venues that we were playing provided food, but now the venues that we're playing often are just music venues and they don't have food there. So before we were saving a lot of money not having to buy our dinners, but now we often have to. And even when you're working with a slightly larger promoter, if you ask them to provide dinner, they'll actually just take it out of the money that you make that night. So you might as well just buy it yourself. Um, yeah, so those are the two things that I mostly plan for extra.
Bingo. Yeah, let's roll here. I tucked this under budgeting, but or, well, maybe we touched on some of these already. But as far as either places that you can shave a few dollars off from what people might expect, or places where, and you mentioned some there, like food, eating nutritious food, especially when you're away for a long period. But yeah, you're trying to be thrifty. Where are the areas where you can maybe surprisingly be thriftier than people might expect, if we haven't touched on it, and somewhere, you know, it might be worth to not go totally bare bones?
Totally. I think that's important because it really depends on the person. Like some bands rough it way harder than my band does because we have like one guy in our band just is prone to getting sick more often, and he really finds that like getting a good night's sleep is important. And we've slept some really uncomfortable, unpleasant places. And there's nothing worse than getting like 3 hours of sleep and then having to go play an actually good show the next day. You just feel so weird about that. It's like really throws off your next day. So we usually end up, if we think that the accommodations at someone's house are going to be like less than ideal, we'll end up just shelling out for a hotel or an Airbnb or whatever. We saved big money because I always just buy. I'm on my third Dodge Grand Caravan now, but every single time it's so worth it to buy a touring vehicle if you can, because the rental fees like super add up like really fast. And both of my vans have cost under or just over $5,000, and that's basically just two tours worth of renting a Dodge Grand Caravan. So you might as well just buy it. I am a big advocate for shelling out for a little bit of extra food. I'm a vegetarian, so I don't like to only eat bread and fries, which is sometimes what ends up happening. So I'll usually go and get a shake or whatever will make me feel good. And then the other thing that, as is written down here, I always make sure that I take my van in for like a good check over, or make sure I get anything fixed before, because I can't actually count the number of times when I've taken it in for the check over and they've found a cable that was like about to snap, and you just don't want to. You don't want that kind of risk on the road. The other thing that you should get for sure is CAA. Just it's so worth it. They've saved us so many times. I could tell you some funny stories about it.
Word to the wise. I think, actually, I do think, and we will do it, that the world of ordering, designing, selling merch would be a really good independent webinar. Tell us what you think
I think
about
so.
that, by the way. Everyone listening, when we wrap up the session here, there's going to be a survey that goes around. If you don't mind taking the 30 seconds to check a few things off and fill out the fields, we very much appreciate it. But let us know if that's something you'd be interested in. So with that, knowing that we could really get into a lot more detail on this, can you give us a quick overview, especially, we were talking about merch as a revenue stream for when you're budgeting. Not that I want you to disclose too much about your project or anything, but if you can give us some guidance as to kind of what to expect and what the investment versus return looks like with merch for a band of your stature, that would be a very big help.
Sure. Yeah, I'm not shy about talking about that. We like to sell about $80 of merch in a night. That is great. Other bands like to sell a lot more than that. Some people just have better merch buying audiences. Typically, if you have like an older audience, you're going to sell more merch because the older audiences are more likely to have CD players, which is a crazy thing to say, but literally most people my age don't have a CD player. I don't have a CD player. I'm a prime example. So there's that to consider. Depending on who you're playing for, you should think about that and consider what kind of stuff that you would want to buy. I find that typically younger people are more apt to buy a shirt than a CD, so keep that in mind. But basically, you're running a small retail business. It's really weird, but you're kind of a clothing store and a clothing designer. And the fact is that not a lot of people are actually good at doing that and music. If you are one of those people, then you are lucky. Micah Ehrenberg in Winnipeg is so good at doing merch, and also he's amazing at music, so that's pretty cool. We never were, and I think it's definitely worth hiring a designer and talking to people who are good at doing merch about potentially paying them to help you set up your merch setup, because it's really, really important that you have a good merch setup if you're touring. We have toured without merch, and it really sucks because there's people at your show every night that are happy to give you $20, and you really need that $20 to pay for food and gas the next day. And if you don't have anything to sell them, they're not going to give you their $20. So have merch. Think seriously about it. My other piece of advice would be don't cheap out on the merch because no one wants to buy a shirt that looks ugly. Yeah, I mean, if we're just kind of slamming through this pretty quickly, I think those are the main points. Buy nice merch, think about who's going to be buying the merch, and then just have the merch and do a good job of selling it. That's the key. One time we left all our merch in Victoria and then flew to Toronto and started a whole other tour in the GTA. That was probably one of the dumbest things I've ever done in my entire life. I don't know how that happened. And we never got that merch back. It was like probably $1,500 of lost merch, and then obviously like probably $4,000 of potential lost income from that. So that was pretty cool.
Well, the next time you played Victoria, was there like a huge influx in, say, homeless people in Middle Coast t-shirts or something?
I hope so. I really hope someone got some use out of it.
Yeah. No, bang on. I should throw out there, not knowing if it still exists, shout out to Red Tentacle, Josh Hogan, based out of Halifax, who we've plugged it in the magazine before. We had a separate download for it. If you Google Red Tentacle merch tracker, what they did is like provide a totally complete like spreadsheet template basically, so that independent bands could just download it. Whatever it is you're selling, you just plug in those items, plug in the cost, plug in your selling price, and it's everything laid out in front of you for easy inventory and sales tracking, which we heard tons of calls with a total godsend. So I'm hoping that you can still find that online, and I'm not saying
you can. I'm on it right now. It's really cool.
Oh, there you go. Well, thanks for
Yeah.
betting. It would be funny if you had logged in and be like, "Oh no, this is just hair." But yeah, we heard a lot of good feedback on that. So there you go. To Liam's point, that is out there. And as Tim Jones, our other friend, said in one of Liam's pieces, if you are not managing your merch very, very closely, then you are probably losing money, or at the very least not making as much as you should be, and nobody wants that. That brings us to the end of the session. Liam, I really appreciate you joining us for this. We're opening up for some questions. I've got a few here. Fire any at us. I should start to. Big thanks, Lori. We appreciate you joining us for these. And Lori had a great suggestion to Liam's point about CAA. She asked for CAA for Christmas every year. What an easy way
So
to
do I.
make sure that you're, hey, man,
Yeah.
great minds think alike. Let's see here. Yeah, so back to Graham here. So Graham's booking a tour right now. He's toured before. He's booked his own tours, but this is a big one. It coincides with the new record, which I happen to know is a very good record and one that I think is going to take this band to the next plateau. So the question is, and Graham, please help me. The word vamping, I think you mean exploit / take advantage of, but his question is, he's really stressing out. Any tips, Liam, on how to deal with the anxiety that comes with constantly reaching out to venues, promoters, and other bands? Oh, wait, okay, I'm wrong. So reaching out to venues, promoters, other bands, and just having nothing come back to you, or maybe a seedling of prospect and then it just disappearing. Like, I've got to think that's discouraging. Any tips to keep someone on the grind?
Yeah, that is hard, and it's so real. I totally feel your pain. I think I know the Graham that we're talking to right now. But yeah, we have emailed some people 40 times or more, and they just never got back to us. And that's really, really frustrating. Um, I guess I don't really know what the right answer is there, except that we just started to look at various other options. Like in some cities, we could never get a hold of the venue that we wanted. So we would kind of go about talking to other bands in the area and seeing if there were people who did house concerts or seeing if there were alternative sort of underground venues. Like there's a place in Lethbridge. There's like a couple promoters there that do these underground shows, and they're pretty cool. And and then we've also done really weird shows in some places. You know, we've played cafes that normally don't have music, and while I normally wouldn't advise that, ultimately a show is a show, and it's, you know, I always prefer to play than not play. It gives you something to look forward to. I hate days off on tour. They're not that fun. You can't spend any money, and you don't have, and you can't play a show, so that's kind of sucks. So basically, I would just, if something's really not working for you, maybe try something out of the box. Try like setting up a house concert or something. One thing that I would advise is if you have a friend that's in a band in that city, try and get them to book the show for you. Like, I know that's maybe kind of awkward, but typically a local band is going to have a way better time booking into a local venue than a touring band. And like venues that we have tried to get into forever, when we actually hook up with a local band and be like, hey, do you mind sending the first email? And they'll reply right away, and it's like super frustrating, but it's just the way it is. Like sometimes that's just the way to go. And also, like if you're stuck for venues or whatever, or maybe you need a different contact, you can get in touch with me on Facebook or over email, liamduncanmusic@gmail.com, and maybe I can point you in the right direction. I don't know, no guarantees, but there's a chance.
What a guy. There you go. And actually, I'll throw that out too. I'm based on the East Coast. I get a lot of requests from friends and people in the industry about venues in some of the bigger Atlantic Canada markets, and I'm always happy to send a list of venues that book indie shows. So yeah, and I guess that's the point, is take advantage of your network. How do you build your network? You book career building shows and just get out on the road, and yeah, it all comes full circle and just slowly builds itself up. So don't get discouraged. I also, Liam, love the point about you saying, like, if anything falls through, if you can't get a show in a certain venue, like, whatever, be creative. You'd rather play than not play. I really think that mentality is key to going back to the very beginning. Like, should you be touring? If you don't have that happy-go-lucky kind of mentality, or just that willingness to do whatever it takes to make a dent, even the smallest dent in the market, maybe the road isn't for you. So definitely heard more horror stories about stuff like that than happy-go-lucky. stuff.
Yeah.
Anyway, Liam Duncan, the Middle Coast, as well. I guess we should plug them all. Roman Clark's band, Michael Bernard Fitzgerald. Do you want to keep rhyming stuff off while cycle through here?
Rattling off other people I play with.
Yeah, or just anything else that you want to let people know
Oh
about.
yeah, sure. Yeah, I also play with this great band in Winnipeg called the Lucas Roger Band. Um, yeah, as I said, you can get in touch with me over Facebook or email. I was gonna say uh, one more thing about that, about Graham's point that I just forgot to mention is that it can often really help to just have someone else on your side. Like now we have a manager, and that's really great, and he is that other person, that cheerleader for us. But even if you know someone else who's played the venue, get them to send an intro email and just like give you that vote of confidence. They'll be like, "Hey, my name is Liam. I've played this venue before. Really had a great time. I would just like to say that this is Graham. Plays in a great band. I think they're a great fit for the venue. You know, that's also a good way to go about it."
Bang on. Yeah, to everyone, thank you very, very much for joining us. Thanks for the kind words, Liam. I should say some thank you and compliments are coming through in the questions here that I will share with you shortly. But our gratitude to you, both from the magazine and from the folks that join us. To everyone out there, you're going to get an email. First, there'll be the survey that I mentioned. We appreciate your input. And yeah, 24 hours after this, you'll get an email to a recorded version of the session. You can revisit if you want to go through something again or share it with anyone in your circle. We more than appreciate it. nwcwebinars.com is where you can go for all the past ones and register for December's. And yeah, that brings us to the end. Again, Liam Duncan, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and I'm Andrew King, Canadian Musician Magazine, CanadianMusician.com, at CDM Musician on Facebook and Twitter. Find us on all the other social media platforms by throwing Canadian Musician into Google. Thanks so much for this, and yeah, we're signing off.